in the House of Commons where we challenged Sajid Javid on the area reviews. I'll tell you exactly what I said. If I can find the bloody thing. Where is it? It's here somewhere. Well, never mind. Well, I'll tell you what. Yes, here we are. I said we've got further education already weakened from 5 years government funding cuts, so why are ministers having hasty, half-cocked area reviews which threaten forced course and college closures? And can I ask, now that the Commons Library today has suggested at least 1.6 billion FE cuts from the Chancellor's demands and a new Green Paper saying that up to 4 out of 10 colleges could close, is there anything that ministers are doing to stop FE becoming the spending reviews whipping boy? Now, needless to say, apart from reminding us on a number of occasions that he'd been to an FE college, but obviously hadn't learnt many of the lessons, Sajid Javid didn't really have anything much to say in that area. And this is a government that is, a department, I'm afraid, that is led by a very dry and dust business secretary who only sees the market side of the picture. He doesn't see the community side. This is a government that doesn't have an overall industrial strategy, and it's a government that shoots itself in the foot in terms of FE, but more importantly, it's shooting everybody across the sector in a more life-threatening ways. It's shooting your colleges, it's shooting you as workers, as teaching assistants, as lecturers, and of course it's attacking the students concerned. And I have spent 20 years before I became an MP working as a part-time course tutor for the Open University. So I know what people put into FE and HE on a part-time and on an adult skills basis, both in terms of learners and in terms of teaching. I know also that FE College is more than the sum of its parts. And if you chop away, as they did with the EMAs, at different aspects of those courses, the whole thing becomes much less viable. So we've got a government that's claiming that it wants to energise technical and professional numbers, but they're stopping FE colleges from doing so, and therefore they won't get the courses demand. They claim they want to boost productivity, but they think in their silos, they ignore the vital role that you all play as individuals and collectively in terms of upgrading and reskilling, particularly adult learners, but also, and I'm always making this point, it's not just about 16 to 19-year-olds, they're very important, but 19 to 24-year-olds are equally important because they are people who very often, for a whole variety of reasons, have not had a first chance, and now the government, with its loan proposals, is planning to scupper aspects of their second chance as well. They talk about the market all the time, but they have turned their back on the ambitions of the Learning Age paper that we brought forward in the early 2000s, and on all the positive suggestions for a more holistic approach, the sorts of things I'm sure John and Jeremy Corbyn have talked about having a national education, a lifelong strategy. So those are some of the problems that we face. And of course, I know, that you have had, shall I put it, not the best of responses from your employers on your pay. Not the best. And, well, a colleague at the front here put it far more eloquently perhaps than I could. But the truth of the matter is that we do need to get everybody back to that negotiation process. Because if we're going to confront the government over these issues, and we will be confronting them, I can assure you that when the higher education bill comes in the new year, we will take every opportunity within that bill to make the point, for example, that they want to introduce a free-for-all market in terms of providers. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's just for HE, but they forget that, and certainly a lot of journalists forget, that 12% of HE and Rising is put out through FE colleges. So actually, at the same time that you're all being praised by government ministers for what you do in HE and FE colleges, they're preparing to let a system come on board which will actually bring untested, many of them overseas, and I haven't forgotten, if some of them have, the BPP scandal in 2011, where they tried to bring in an untested outside market person with all sorts of scandals. So we are going to press them really hard on that, and on this issue of FE area reviews and closures, and I think we're trying very hard to get an adjournment debate or an opposition day debate on that subject, because what you say, and what I've read obviously in your 10-point thing, is absolutely right about education. Education is not simply a mechanistic thing. Employability, yes, that is really important, But the way in which you do that employability is important as well. And I know, because I had this job before being given the university side as well, the reshuffle, I had this job for 3 years. So I went round lots of FE colleges. I chaired the all-party FE and skills group for 3 years. I know that actually there is a tension in 21st century work and employability between the specific skills that you give to people to enable them to get a job now and the generic skills which they will need to have for their careers for the rest of their lives. And too often, government talks as if it's like a mechanistic process, and you just feed all the grain into the machine and it produces, you know, some, like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, someone who will perhaps do something very specifically for bespoke skills. But we have to think not just about the needs of a particular employer, and you have to think in what you do in your colleges and your providers, not just about the particular interests of an employer for 2 years for the person that you're teaching, but about the life skills that they will need and the employability skills. Because we all know, and it's a feature of the 21st century, there's nothing we can do about it, that young people coming in today will probably have 4 or 5 different careers, 2 of which they haven't even thought about yet, or nobody's thought about yet. We also know, and I know this going right back to Sandy Leach's report at the end of the 2000s, that with the demographic changes, supporting and engaging adult learners and skills, and particularly women. When I taught for the OU, about 60% of my students were women between the ages of 30 and 50. And they were people who wanted to come back, perhaps from looking after relatives, perhaps you know, they had family commitments, whatever, and they wanted to come back into the employment world. And the government talks all the time about getting more women back into the employment world, but they don't give them the mechanisms to do so. And just one other thing, again, I know you had a lobby on ESOL Parliament recently. I wasn't able to be there, but I know that my colleague Matthew Pennycook and 1 or 2 other people met with people there. ESOL is a classic example of how the government talks the talk but doesn't do the walk. You'll go out any day of the week now and you'll hear government ministers talking about social cohesion and all the rest of it. But they're preparing to go ahead with these cuts in ESOL that will actually make it more difficult for people who've come in not as native English speakers to fit in and get on. And when I was up at Manchester FE College 3 years ago, when we were fighting over the whole issue of advanced learning loans and on 24+, the group of women that I met there, half of them were people who were not ESOL people, they needed ESOL or had needed ESOL instruction. The other half were people who'd actually been working in the public sector, in social care and in related areas. They'd lost their jobs in those areas because of the cuts and because of the way in which the government's outsourced everything. So they were trying to learn to get to level 3, you know, to be able to work on their own, do their own self-employment. So, you know, that's what the government says they want people to do, but they do not provide the mechanisms to do it. So I just want to say today, because I'm sure you've heard from John already, but I just want to say today that we will stand shoulder to shoulder with you on all of these issues in terms of what we need to do to get funding back into FE. I mean, as you know, and the figures that came out today, and which my colleague Lucy Powell has talked about in The Guardian and other papers today, you know that the minimum amount of money that George Osborne is demanding out of Sajid Javid's department is £1.6 billion. We promised in our manifesto that we would protect and ring-fence FE, but the government didn't make that promise. So where do you think, if George Osborne is going to get his 25% from, that is looking at the moment where it's going to come? And it's going to come from the FE sector. If you make enough fuss, and if we make enough fuss over the next 10 days, who knows, we might mitigate it a bit. But that's the problem. We've got a department there that doesn't understand the overall contribution. So we're going to keep fighting with you. We're going to take up these issues, and we understand that FE is not simply a useful add-on. It is right at the heart of people's employment prospects. That includes the valuable people who've worked in the system, in many cases for 20 or 30 years, for not a huge amount of money, compared with vice-chancellors and other people, and that they need to be supported and protected in that process, and we will work with you in that process.